Welcome to Science for today. So, what we have lined up today, of course, is our question of the day. So you can definitely see here on your screen, how long does it take for a forest to get back to normal after a fire? So that's our question of the day here. I'll give you guys about 30 or so seconds. And with the power of a little bit of video editing, we'll be coming back here very shortly. And we're back. And so hopefully you guys had a little bit of a think there. And our answer for today's question of the day, 70 to 100 years. Because let's think about, of course, those trees that are in that ecosystem, right? It takes them a bit of time to grow. So that's how long it's going to take for our forest to get back to normal. So we're going to jump into today's lesson, which is all about, I guess we could say, things going back to normal. So succession is the name of today's lesson. So we're going to be looking at primary and secondary succession here today, and we're also going to be describing a climax community, which is something we did talk about just slightly in terms of our lynx and hare example the other day, where we got to that top point on our graph, right? That's when you get a climax community. So talk about that more in a bit. So we're going to go over primary and then secondary. These are both two processes that take quite a bit of time. And primary and secondary are different, and we're going to find out exactly how they're different here coming up. So let's start off with just some bare rock. So you can see over here we have some bare rock. You also have these in your jot notes, right? So no life, right? So a good example of this is, for instance, a volcano erupts, clears off all living things, right? And forms some new land. You get some bare rock there. Next stage, you're going to move on to mosses and lichen. Then you have some soil starting to get a little bit more ready for plants. And then you got small herbs and shrubs. And then finally, you'll have trees. So this is kind of a snapshot of exactly how this happens. So primary succession, try and remember primary, right? You start off with nothing, and then you end up with a beautiful ecological community. So we're going to go for this step by step. So for your jot notes, hopefully you all have them out at this point. Okay. Stage 1. Again, you can just draw this out in your jot notes. Just some bare rock, right? There's no soil, there's nothing going on, nothing too fancy. So just take a couple seconds to draw out some bare rock there on your jot notes. Again, making that connection, right? Because you have your notes there, making a visual connection is just as good. So again, it could be volcano in the middle of nowhere, right? Out there in the ocean, erupts, creates some land. Nothing living on there until, well, we go through the process of succession. So that's stage 1. I'm going to talk about stage 2 now. So this is when rocks start to get weathered down, break apart. You have soil that will start to become formed, or start to be formed at this point. So you have algae, moss, and of course lichen, which are just basically little tiny producers that will live on rocky surfaces, and they'll start, again, taking the sun's energy, right, turning that into sugars. So then this is kind of the starting form of our ecosystem. You'll also see fungus there as well. So again, those guys, if there's enough minerals and resources, they'll start to pop up too. So that's stage 2 of primary succession. And again, maybe draw a little rock with a little bit of moss on there, right? Maybe point an arrow to it. Make sure that you remember that's moss and algae. So a little bit of art today with our science. So as you guys are doing that, let's move on to number 3. And again, these can just be really quick drawings. Number 3. So this is where we start to get some living things. You get some grass that starts to develop, maybe some flowers, few small animals, so it could be insects as well, not just rodents. So this is a nice part in the development stage of our ecosystem. So this is kind of a big step. So again, draw out maybe some grass, maybe some small insects or a little animal there in your notes. Yeah. And of course, I will have these posted up for you guys on Google Classroom as well, so you guys can go back, double check things, and make sense of it again if you need to recap. So again, bugs, small little rodents. So this brings us to number 4. So after we go from grasses, you go to shrubs and bushes. So this is stage 4. All right, here we have a nice beautiful image there of a jackrabbit with its massive ears, right? Sunlight just beaming right through those. And we also have a little ground squirrel there as well on the lookout. So this is of course when you can get bigger animals, right? In this case, small ones. Because again, there's enough of those producers around to support these guys. Because if you remember about yesterday's lesson with the lynx and the hare, right? It takes a lot of hares to support just a couple of lynxes. So for this one here, draw out a couple little bushes and shrubs, and maybe a funny little rabbit jumping around. Okay. So that's going to be stage 4. So we'll move on to stage 5 next. So of stage 5, we got some small trees that start to pop up, and then we'll start to see some other animals. So again, drawing a couple of these out would be handy. Again, small trees, and then something like deers or raccoons. You could also have some other animals too, like goats. It depends on, again, what can get to that area. Okay. So we got our small trees and our larger animals. So that's stage 5. So again, you can draw out a quick little one, and we're going to move on to stage 6, which is your climax community. If you think about in a story, again, we're connecting a bit of English here, the climax of your story is kind of like that tipping point, right? So the climax for our ecosystem is right when we get to the most amount of things that can kind of be in there, right? Everything's working at top efficiency. We got all the plants, we got all the animals. This is when we can support those massive carnivores on the top of our energy pyramid. So things like bears, right? They could be one of those top predators. So we have enough things to be able to support them. So for your drawing for this section, draw out some big trees, maybe a grizzly bear, a moose, right? Some big animals. So this is stage 6. Some other examples too, if we were to think about this. Put down some birds of prey as well, right? Those guys, they need a lot of support on their energy pyramid to be able to, of course, do what they do. So again, this is the climax community, or the last part of our succession. You can think of succession as a story, right? We start off with nothing, and then now we're here, right? We go along in different stages. So that is our primary succession. So we're going to go over secondary succession here really soon. It's fairly similar to primary succession, but there's a couple of little differences that we need to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Hopefully you got some nice happy trees. Just think about Bob Ross there. So secondary succession. Of course, you guys also have this in your notes as well. So in this case here, you're not starting off with nothing. If you see there on this image here at the bottom left there might have been a forest fire here. So something happened to this environment. So it could have been a forest fire, could have been a disease affecting a bunch of the trees. It could have been something that, of course, like a tornado that could have ripped through the area, right? Where things really get broken apart and disturbed. So we have a little snapshot here. This is also in your notes. So for this one here, you don't need to be doing any drawing. The main thing here is to maybe underline a disturbed environment, right? You can put an example of maybe a fire that could have started this whole another section of succession. So again, this is where we get the 70 to 100 years of how long it takes to actually get back to a normal type of forest, right? To a climax ecosystem. It takes some time. So we're going to go over the stages for secondary succession next. Okay. And again, with this one here, you can do some little drawings that follow suit with your notes. So again, you have all your notes there. So we're going to move on. So stage 1, right? You need to have, of course, a forest fire, a flood, tornado, something that happens. But you still have, of course, the soil present. So you could draw out a little forest fire if you want, or just some flames, maybe a bunch of water, little cyclone or tornado on your notes. But one thing, of course, that can't be removed is the soil, right? It might get charred, it might get covered in water, right? But eventually, that soil is going to be ready for the ecosystem. And it'll be able to start kicking in and helping plants and animals, of course, flourish. So again, for this one, a little fire, right? Some trees, or of course a flood, or a way of showing that a habitat was taken away from a poor little critter. So that's stage 1. Stage 2, all that's left is, of course, some poor unfortunate trees. So you got some carbon that's still left in there, right? Because they're trees, right? They're basically carbon sinks. They store that carbon. They're just standing there, right? Some of them might fall over, right? So there's not really too much around, but you're going to start seeing a little bit of green in there, such as like little weeds, little tiny grasses, stuff like that's going to start to pop up. But again, at the second stage, it's kind of just after the fire, so we're not going to quite see too much of that. So for this one, for your drawing, draw some burnt out trees, maybe a flooded area where everything's still kind of wet. Some of you might have been in over towards Jasper and Banff when there were some forest fires. I've actually seen the effect of, again, forest fires over there when I was heading out that way a number of years ago. And the trees, just lots of little toothpicks is what it looks like from afar. And again, it's starting to recover even after a couple of years. There's some greenery that's popping up in those areas where the forest fires happened. So, again, some burnt out trees for this one. So stage 3, this is where you get your grasses and your weeds. Some insects are coming in. Some of the trees might actually recover. Some of them are pretty durable, especially if they had enough resources. They might have been able to survive the fire. So again, this one here, you can draw some little grasses, right? And some more insects and rodents. Again, the cycle of life continues. And again, these can just be quick little drawings, right? As long as you guys are making the connection between the written stuff and the stuff that you're seeing. Right. So I'm going to move on to stage 4. This is where you have shrubs, flowering bushes, and some more critters. You can see a stinky one over there in the corner, a skunk. If you want to draw that in for this one here, by all means, go for it. So again, this one here, got bushes, small animals, some trees that are still kind of burnt, right? So we can, of course, draw that one out quickly. We also have, of course, down there as well, that looks like another ground squirrel, or it might be a gopher. Little tiny birds as well might be popping back in the area because there's enough food for them, such as, of course, seeds from various little bushes or flowering plants, right? There might be some food in there for some of these guys. And of course, that brings in insects too. A lot of birds, of course, eat insects, which is a good thing for us. And our little skunk down there, he's kind of an omnivore. He'll eat pretty much anything he can get his hands on, be it an insect, a small little rodent. So those guys there are pretty tough critters. So that's stage 4 for your secondary succession. This brings us to stage 5. So this is where you got small trees popping up. So you can draw out some small trees for this one. And of course some bigger animals, maybe possum, some blue jays, that type of thing. maybe some crows, raccoons like we saw previously. So again, take a little moment to do little drawings, a couple small trees, and just a quick thing of a little animal there with them. Again, that's stage 5 for secondary succession. Again, I know I might be going a bit quick for these as well. Again, we can always pause if need be, if someone's still working on a quick little drawing there. So again, thank you for your attention. We do appreciate it. So that's stage 5. I'm going to move on to stage 6. This is, of course, our climax, just like the other one. So this is where you get a bunch of trees popping up. Your forest is kind of back to its previous glory. You have your animals popping in there, your bears, your deer, your moose, your fox, your owls, right? All those little animals popping back in, and the big ones. So the food chain, the food web, right? It's reestablished. It's back to where it was. Things are working again. So again, for this one, you can draw some big trees and some bigger animals. And again, at this point here, if anyone needs to go back and is wondering about one of the stages, might be a good time. And again, the main thing with the climax community, again, that's when we have that peak capacity where everything that can be in there is in there. Right? This is before that tipping point where things run out of resources and then that curve goes down. So that's secondary succession. We're almost there for today's lesson. So I'm going to move on next to just a couple of finishing slides. So this is another one that you have in your notes. Here we have the general succession, right, of primary succession. And this shows us again that it's a lot slower than our secondary. So if you think of going from rocks to soil, that takes quite a bit of time. That doesn't just happen overnight. So that's what we have as the pioneer stage. It takes quite a bit of time to move from those bare rocks and actually have plants that will grow on them and in that area. And then of course we have the intermediate stage. That's where you're going to have your bushes and shrubs and your trees start to pop up. And then your climax community, you're going to have some nice shade in there, right? It's a nice, healthy environment for all your animals. So again, we can see down there it takes hundreds of years for this to happen. And nature takes its time. So again, you have this one in your notes. With that, this leads us to our questions for today. So, in your textbook, page 64, you guys have questions 1 to 6 to work on. Okay. And that little photo of the tree there, that's actually one of the biggest giant sequoias here on our planet, and that one is found somewhere in California. That tree is massive. You can basically have a couple of cars in terms of space that would, you could park them next to one another and it still wouldn't make up the size of the trunk there. It's a very big tree. So that's it for today's lesson. Again, if you guys have questions, you can always message me on Google Classroom or on Teams. Microsoft Teams will get that running in the next little while for some of you. So hope you enjoyed this lesson. And again, thank you again for paying attention. And I do appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next part. So, till later, good luck with the rest of your day.